3 seconds. That's how long the kiss lasted. How long it took for Melanie Joshua to press her lips against a stranger's mouth, taste copper and expensive whiskey, and realize she'd just walked into a trap she didn't know had been set. The red room didn't roar anymore. It held its breath. She pulled back, heart hammering against her ribs, expecting shock or maybe amusement. Instead, she found something far more dangerous. Focus. Taehyun-won's eyes locked onto hers like a scope finding its target. Dark and unreadable and absolutely certain. He was massive. Not in the decorative way of men who lived in gyms, but in the way of men who broke things for a living. His shoulders filled the space. His presence swallowed the light. The tattoos crawling up his neck disappeared beneath the collar of a shirt too expensive for this neighborhood. And his hands, God, his hands, rested on the table like weapons at ease. One of them was bleeding. Fresh blood, dark against his knuckles, glistening under the neon. Not his blood, she realized with a sickening drop in her stomach. Someone else's. You taste reckless, he said, voice low and even, like he was noting the weather. Melanie swallowed. Her throat felt tight. It was just a dare. Just, he repeated, as if testing the weight of the word. Then his hand moved. Not fast, but deliberate, wrapping around her wrist. Not to hurt, to anchor, to claim. You have no idea what you just started. Melanie tried to pull back, but his grip was absolute. Not painful, just immovable. I'm fine, she said, though her voice came out lighter than she felt. And you can let go now. Game's over. His eyes finally lowered to her face. Not roaming, not softening, just measuring, like she was a problem he needed to solve before deciding how to react. Games have rules, he said, his thumb brushing the pulse point on her wrist. And consequences. The bar around them kept moving. Someone laughed too loud. Glass shattered somewhere near the pool tables. A woman screamed in delight. But in their small pocket of space, time felt suspended. He finally released her wrist, placing that large hand on the table beside her instead, close enough that she still felt caged by his presence alone. She noticed the blood on his knuckles was still wet. You shouldn't let people push you into things, he said, his voice carrying an edge that made her spine straighten. I wanted to, Melanie heard herself say, lifting her chin in defiance she didn't quite feel. That earned her something new, not a smile. Interest. He studied her for another long moment, and she studied him back, the hard line of his jaw. The tattoo that crept from beneath his collar and traced the side of his neck in intricate patterns she couldn't quite make out in the red light. The small silver hoops in his ears that somehow made him look more dangerous instead of less. Then he stepped back, giving her space as if he'd never blocked it in the first place. Be careful, he said. Just that. Nothing more. Melanie didn't wait for an explanation. She turned and walked back to her table, forcing her legs to move normally even though her heart was trying to break through her ribs. Behind her, she felt his gaze like a physical weight between her shoulder blades. Keisha was already talking before Melanie reached the booth. Oh my God, what did he say? Did he freak out? That was insane, Mel, his security almost. Nothing happened. Melanie cut in, sliding into her seat and reaching for her drink with a hand that trembled just slightly. It was fine. Fine? Val's eyebrows shot up. Girl, you kissed the most terrifying man in this bar and he looked at you like he was deciding whether to kill you or marry you. Melanie laughed, but it sounded hollow even to her own ears. She drained half her glass, welcoming the burn. You're being dramatic. Am I? Val leaned forward, lowering her voice. Because I'm pretty sure I just watched a predator mark his prey. It was 3 seconds, Melanie said firmly. And now it's over. Except it wasn't. She knew it wasn't. Because even as she tried to focus on her friends, tried to lose herself in the music and the alcohol and the celebration of freedom from a marriage that had slowly been suffocating her, she could feel him. Every time she glanced toward the VIP section, he was there. Sitting in the same position. Watching, not staring, not leering, just aware. Tracking her movements with the patience of someone who had all the time in the world. An hour passed. Then another. Melanie danced, laughed, took selfies with Keisha and Val, did everything she could to prove to herself that the kiss meant nothing, that the man in the corner was just another story she'd tell someday about the wild night she celebrated her divorce. But when she excused herself to the bathroom, she found him waiting in the hallway. Jesus. Melanie pressed a hand to her chest, her heart lurching. You scared me. Taehyun stood with his back against the wall, arms crossed, looking like he'd been there for hours instead of seconds. Up close, away from the red lighting, she could see him more clearly. The precise fade of his haircut, the way his dress shirt fit across his chest and shoulders like it had been tailored to him, the coldness in his eyes that suggested he didn't scare easily, or at all. That was the point, he said. Melanie straightened, trying to reclaim some of the confidence she'd felt when this was all just a dare. Are you following me? You kissed me in my bar. He said it like that explained everything. Maybe it did. I'm following up. Your bar? My city, actually. The bar is just a small piece. Something cold slithered down Melanie's spine. She glanced back toward the main room, suddenly aware of how isolated this hallway was, how the music covered any sound. Look, I'm sorry if I offended you. It really was just a dare, I know. He pushed off the wall, and she fought the urge to step back. But you chose me. Out of everyone in that room, your friends pointed at me, and you said yes. You were the most serious-looking guy here. It was funnier that way. Funnier, he repeated. And this time there was something that might have been amusement in his voice. Might have been, you have no survival instincts. Excuse me? The man you kissed, Taehyun said, moving closer, was in the middle of a conversation about how many fingers to remove from a debtor before he bled out. The man you kissed has 17 bodies to his name. The man you kissed owns half the illegal operations in K-Town and is currently being investigated by 3 federal agencies. Melanie's breath caught. And you walked up to me, he continued, his voice dropping to something almost intimate. Put your hands on my jacket, pulled me down, and kissed me like you had every right to. He was close now. Close enough that she could smell him. Something expensive and clean beneath the faint metallic scent of blood. Close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. That kind of confidence, he said softly, is either breathtaking or suicidal. I haven't decided which yet. I'm just a PR consultant, Melanie whispered. I clean up corporate messes. I'm nobody. Taehyun's hand came up, and she flinched, but he only brushed his thumb across her lower lip, so gently she barely felt it. You're not nobody, he said. Not anymore. Then he stepped back, straightening his cuffs like they'd been discussing the weather. Go back to your friends. Finish your celebration. But understand something, Melanie Joshua. Her name in his mouth sent chills racing down her arms. You walked into my world tonight. Leaving isn't as simple as walking back out. He turned and headed back toward the VIP section, leaving her standing in the hallway with her heart pounding and her mind racing. How did he know her name? She hadn't told him her name. Melanie returned to her booth on autopilot, smiling and nodding at whatever Keisha and Val were saying but not really hearing them. Her eyes kept drifting to the VIP section, to the man who'd just turned her entire night sideways. She watched him through the crowd, watched him lean in to speak to one of his security team, watched him check his phone, his expression never changing. Watched him glance up once, catch her staring, and hold her gaze until she looked away first. I think it's time to go, Melanie said suddenly. What? No, Keisha protested. We just got here. It's been 3 hours. And I have an early meeting tomorrow. A lie, but a necessary one. You guys stay. I'll get an Uber. She didn't wait for their protests. She grabbed her clutch, threw some cash on the table, and headed for the exit, weaving through the crowd with single-minded focus. The night air hit her like a slap, cold and sharp after the oppressive heat of the bar. Melanie pulled out her phone, fingers shaking slightly as she called for a ride. 3 minutes away. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly feeling exposed on the street corner. The Red Room's neon sign bathed everything in crimson, making the shadows deeper, more menacing. A black SUV pulled up to the curb, and for a panicked moment, Melanie thought. But then the window rolled down, and it was her Uber driver, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes who asked if she was Melanie. Yes, thank God, Melanie breathed, climbing into the back seat. As the car pulled away from the curb, she twisted in her seat to look back at the bar. In the window of the VIP section, she saw a figure standing, watching her leave. Taehyun-won raised one hand in a gesture that might have been a wave. Or a promise. Melanie woke to sunlight stabbing through the blinds of her queen's apartment and a headache that felt personal. She lay still, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together the previous night into something that made sense. The celebration, the dare, the kiss. The hallway conversation that felt more like a threat than flirtation. You walked into my world tonight. Leaving isn't as simple as walking back out. She groaned, pressing her palms against her eyes. It was just talk. Intimidation tactics from a man who clearly enjoyed having power over people. She was a crisis management consultant. For Christ's sake. She dealt with powerful, dangerous men all the time. CEOs who'd committed fraud, politicians with secrets, celebrities with bodies in their closets. This was no different. Except it was. Because none of those men had ever looked at her the way Taehyun-won had. None of them had made her feel like prey and partner in the same breath. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Melanie reached for it, expecting a text from Keisha or Val asking if she got home safely. Instead, there were 3 missed calls from her office. At 6 a.m. on a Saturday, her stomach dropped. She called back, and her assistant answered on the first ring. "Melanie, thank God. I know it's your day off, but..." A pause, the sound of papers shuffling. "We have a situation. A new client bought a controlling stake in the firm overnight. He's asking for you specifically." "Who?" But even as she asked, Melanie already knew. "A Mr. Won. Taehyun-won. He's waiting in the main conference room, and Melanie," her assistant's voice dropped to a whisper. "He brought his lawyers. And security. Lots of security." Melanie sat up slowly, the room spinning slightly. "I'll be there in 45 minutes. She ended the call and sat on the edge of her bed, processing. The kiss had lasted 3 seconds. 3 seconds that changed everything. 3 seconds that proved Taehyun-won meant every word he'd said in that hallway. She wasn't nobody anymore. And leaving his world was going to be a hell of a lot harder than she'd thought. Because Taehyun-won hadn't just marked her as prey, he'd hired her. And Melanie Joshua had a sinking feeling that this was only the beginning. Hello, my fierce hearts and midnight wanderers. Before we lose ourselves in this story, make sure you're subscribed and hit that like button to let me know you're here. In the comments, tell me where in the world are you listening from tonight. I love seeing how far our dark romance family reaches. Your support means everything and keeps these stories alive. So find a comfortable spot, dim the lights, and let's begin. The elevator to Joshua and Sterling PR had never felt so slow. Melanie watched the numbers climb. 12, 13, 14, each floor bringing her closer to whatever hell waited on the 16th. Her reflection in the polished steel doors showed a woman who dressed for battle. Charcoal pencil skirt, silk blouse the color of dried blood, heels sharp enough to be classified as weapons. She'd tied her natural curls back into a tight bun, exposing the sharp lines of her jaw and cheekbones. War paint, her grandmother would have called it. The office was wrong the moment she stepped through the glass doors. Too quiet. The receptionist's desk sat empty, her computer monitor still glowing with an abandoned email. Melanie's heels clicked against marble floors that suddenly sounded too loud, each step echoing in the unnatural silence. The usual morning chaos. Phones ringing, keyboards clattering, associates arguing over coffee, had been replaced by something that felt like the moment before a bomb detonates. She saw them through the glass walls of the main conference room, 7 men in black suits flanking the table like cemetery statues. Her business partner, Richard Sterling, sat in the corner, his normally ruddy face gone the color of spoiled milk. And at the head of the table, exactly where Richard should have been sitting, was Taehyun-won. He'd traded the blood-stained shirt from the club for an expensive suit, charcoal gray, perfectly tailored to emphasize the breadth of his shoulders and the narrowness of his waist. His tattoos were hidden beneath crisp white cotton, the collar buttoned high enough to conceal the ink that crawled up his neck. He looked legitimate, legal, like a businessman instead of what he truly was. That made him infinitely more dangerous. Melanie pushed through the door without knocking, letting it swing shut behind her with a decisive click. She met Taehyun's gaze across the room and refused to let hers drop first. "Mr. Sterling, what's going on?" Richard opened his mouth, but nothing came out except a sound like a strangled animal. Mr. Sterling is no longer relevant to this conversation, Taehyun said, his voice carrying the same dark calm it had in the club. He leaned back in the chair. Her chair, technically, since she owned 51% of this firm, and gestured to the seat across from him. Sit. I'd rather stand. I wasn't asking. His eyes tracked her with predatory focus, and Melanie felt the weight of every person in the room watching this power play unfold. She'd spent 10 years building this company from the ground up, clawing her way through a white-dominated industry that had tried to shove her into a corner labeled diversity hire. She wasn't about to let some criminal take it from her because of a 3-second kiss. But her legs carried her to the chair anyway. Survival instinct, maybe. Or the recognition that sometimes you had to pick your battles, and this room full of armed men wasn't the hill to die on. Taehyun slid a manila folder across the polished wood. It moved silently, deliberately, coming to rest exactly centered in front of her. Open it. Melanie's fingers trembled slightly as she lifted the cover. Inside were photographs. High resolution. Professional quality. The man from the club. The one who'd been begging at Taehyun's feet. Only in these images, he wasn't begging. He was sprawled on concrete in an alley, his head twisted at an angle that defied anatomy. Blood had pooled beneath him, black in the camera flash. His eyes were still open, staring at nothing. She swallowed the bile rising in her throat and flipped to the next photo. Same man, different angle. Then another. And another. 12 photographs documenting the systematic destruction of a human being. The police report will say he died of a drug overdose, Taehyun said conversationally, as if they were discussing weather patterns. Tragic, really. A promising young accountant brought down by addiction. His family will receive a generous settlement from an anonymous benefactor. They'll be able to bury him with dignity. Melanie forced herself to look up from the photos, to meet those dark, depthless eyes. Why are you showing me this? Because you need to understand what you've walked into. He stood, buttoning his suit jacket with practiced ease, and walked around the table. Each step measured, controlled. He stopped behind her chair, close enough that she could smell him. Cedar and smoke and something sharper underneath, like ozone before a lightning strike. My public image requires sanitation. You're going to provide it. I'm a crisis management consultant, not a criminal defense attorney. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. You want legal help? Hire. I don't need legal help. I need a miracle worker. His hand came down on the back of her chair, and she felt the heat of him through the leather. Last night, there was an incident at one of my warehouses. A gas leak caused an explosion. Very tragic. 12 people died. A gas leak. The words tasted like ash. That's the official story. He leaned down, his mouth close enough to her ear that his breath stirred the tiny hairs at her nape. The unofficial story is that those 12 people were stealing from me. The unofficial story is that I made an example of them. The unofficial story ends with gasoline and a match, and screams that nobody will ever hear again. Melanie's hands clenched in her lap, nails biting into her palms hard enough to leave crescents. You want me to cover up a massacre. I want you to do what you do best. He straightened, walking back around to face her. I've read your file, Miss Joshua. Very impressive. The pharmaceutical executive caught with underage prostitutes. You turned that into a story about a man seeking treatment for sex addiction. The tech CEO who embezzled $60 million. You made him look like a victim of identity theft. The senator with the dead intern in his car. You got him reelected with a campaign about forgiveness and redemption. Each case he listed was a scar on her conscience. A piece of her soul she'd sold for money and reputation. Hearing them cataloged so clinically made her feel stripped naked, exposed in ways that had nothing to do with clothing. Those were different, she said. But the protest sounded weak even to her own ears. Were they? Taehyun leaned against the table, arms crossed, head tilted in mock curiosity. You've been cleaning up messes for criminals in expensive suits your entire career. The only difference between them and me is that I'm honest about what I am. The difference, Melanie said, standing abruptly enough that her chair rolled back and hit the wall, is that I had a choice. I could walk away from those cases. I could say no. Taehyun smiled, and it was the coldest expression she'd ever seen on a human face. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a phone. Without breaking eye contact, he pressed play on an audio file. Her own voice filled the room, tinny through the speakers but unmistakably hers. "The payment will be wired to the Cayman account we discussed. Make sure the audit trail goes cold at the third shell company. If anyone asks, this conversation never happened." She remembered that call. A pharmaceutical client, 3 years ago. He'd paid her $250,000 to make evidence disappear. She'd told herself it was just business, that everyone in her position bent the rules, that the line between legal and illegal was so blurred it might as well not exist. The audio file ended. Silence rushed back in like water filling a drowning man's lungs. "Wire fraud," Taehyun said pleasantly. "Conspiracy to obstruct justice. Destruction of evidence. Should I continue?" "You're blackmailing me." The words came out flat, emotionless. Shock maybe. Or the death of the last illusion she'd had about maintaining control of this situation. "I'm offering you a job." He pocketed the phone. "You work for me now. I bought your partner's gambling debts 3 months ago. As of 6 o'clock this morning, he signed over his voting rights and equity to me to avoid having his legs broken. Which means I own you. You'll do exactly what I tell you to do, when I tell you to do it, or that recording goes to the FBI. Do you understand?" Melanie looked at Richard, slumped in his chair like a puppet with cut strings. He wouldn't meet her eyes. She looked at the men lining the walls, their faces blank masks that promised violence if she said the wrong thing. She looked at the photos scattered across the table, at the evidence of what Taehyun-won was capable of when someone disappointed him. "I understand," she said, and felt something fundamental inside her crack. "Good." Taehyun moved to the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. "The police are holding a press conference at noon about the warehouse fire. You have 3 hours to craft a statement from the one organization expressing our condolences and pledging to improve safety standards. You'll deliver it personally. Wear something that makes you look trustworthy. And after that?" He looked back at her. And for just a moment, something flickered in those dark eyes. Not quite sympathy, but a recognition of shared damnation. "After that, Miss Joshua, you become complicit. Welcome to the family business." The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like a prison cell locking. Melanie stood alone in the conference room, surrounded by photos of a dead man and the wreckage of her carefully constructed life. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from Keisha. "Brunch tomorrow?" "I'm buying." She stared at the message until the words stopped making sense, until the bright cheerfulness of it felt like a message from another universe where things like brunch and friendship still mattered. 3 hours. She had 3 hours to become an accessory to mass murder. Melanie picked up the photos, stacking them neatly, and got to work. The coffee shop Keisha had chosen was aggressively trendy. Exposed brick walls, Edison bulbs hanging from copper fixtures, a chalkboard menu written in that irritating handwriting font that was supposed to look artisanal. Melanie sat in the back corner booth, watching her best friend of 8 years navigate through the Saturday brunch crowd with mimosas in both hands. Keisha Young had been her roommate in grad school, her maid of honor at the wedding that ended in divorce, the first person she'd called when her mother died. They'd built their friendship on late nights and shared secrets, on the understanding that comes from being Black women trying to survive in spaces that weren't designed for them. Melanie trusted her the way you trust gravity, implicitly, without question, but Keisha was nervous. Melanie had known it the moment she'd walked in, the way her eyes darted to the exit, the way she gripped her phone like a lifeline. And now, sliding into the booth across from her, Keisha's smile was too bright, too performative. "I ordered us the avocado toast," Keisha said, setting down the mimosas with just a little too much force. Liquid sloshed over the rim. "And the chicken and waffles. We're celebrating, right? New chapter? New you? New something." Melanie agreed, picking up her glass but not drinking. She watched Keisha over the rim, cataloging details she'd missed before. The watch, a Cartier, rose gold, easily $10,000. New. Keisha worked as a physical therapist. She couldn't afford that watch. The nails, fresh acrylics, stiletto-shaped, done at a salon that charged $200 a set. The designer purse sitting on the bench beside her, still sporting the price tag tucked discreetly inside the leather. Melanie's stomach dropped. "That's a beautiful watch," she said casually. "When did you get it?" Keisha glanced down at her wrist, and something flickered across her face too quickly to identify. Oh, this? Early birthday present to myself? I've been saving up. Lie. Melanie had spent 10 years learning to read people, to spot the micro-expressions that betrayed deception. The way Keisha's pupils dilated slightly, the barely perceptible tightening around her mouth, the way her hand moved to cover the watch face, as if hiding evidence. Expensive present, Melanie observed. I work hard. I deserve nice things. Defensive now. Keisha's phone buzzed on the table, and she grabbed it immediately, angling the screen away. But not before Melanie saw the name at the top. Associate. Just that. No first name, no emoji. Associate. The coffee shop suddenly felt too warm, the walls pressing in. Melanie's mind raced through the past week, replaying every moment with the cold analytical precision she usually reserved for client crises. The dare hadn't been Keisha's idea. Val had suggested it first, but Keisha had been the one to point out Taehyun specifically, to insist that Melanie pick the scariest-looking guy. And afterward, when Melanie had wanted to leave, Keisha had tried to convince her to stay, to have one more drink, to wait just a little longer. Keisha, Melanie said softly. Are you in some kind of trouble? What? No. Why would you? Another buzz. Keisha looked at the phone, and her face went pale. Actually pale. The color draining so completely that Melanie could see the foundation line at her jaw. Let me see your phone. Mel, that's crazy. Let me see it. Melanie's voice dropped into the register she used for hostile negotiations, the tone that said this wasn't a request. Now, Keisha's hand shook as she unlocked the phone and slid it across the table. Melanie picked it up, scrolled through the messages from Associate. Most were mundane. Times, dates, locations. But then, confirmed, the target made contact. Payment transferred. She took the bait. Clean break from here. Don't contact her again unless instructed. We're watching. The date stamp on the last message was from last Saturday, the day before the dare. Melanie looked up slowly. Target? Keisha's eyes were wet, mascara already beginning to run in dark rivulets down her cheeks. Mel, I swear I didn't know. I didn't understand what they wanted. Who are they? But Melanie already knew. She'd known the moment she saw that watch. The moment the pieces started clicking into place with the horrible inevitability of a car crash in slow motion. I owed money, Keisha whispered. A lot of money. Gambling debt. I thought I could control it. I thought I could stop. But it got so big. Mel. And these men showed up at my apartment. And they said I had 3 days to pay or they'd... Her voice broke. They said they'd kill my mother. $50,000. That's what Keisha owed. Melanie knew because she'd helped her best friend refinance her apartment 2 years ago, had seen the pay stubs and bank statements. Keisha made $60,000 a year. $50,000 might as well have been $50 million. So, you sold me. Melanie's voice came from somewhere outside her body, detached and clinical. Shock, probably. The kind that let you function through trauma by pretending it was happening to someone else. They didn't tell me what would happen. Keisha reached across the table, but Melanie pulled back like she'd been burned. They just said to bring you to the Red Room, to dare you to kiss this specific guy. They said it was about business connections, that he was looking for a PR person, and this was how he vetted people. I thought it was weird, but I was desperate, and they said they'd forgive the entire debt if I just did this one thing. Did you know he was a killer? Melanie asked. Did you know what he does? Keisha's silence was answer enough. Get out, Melanie said. Mel, please. Get out. Melanie didn't shout. She didn't need to. The words came out in a hiss of pure venom, and Keisha flinched like she'd been slapped. You put a target on my back. You fed me to a monster to save yourself. We're done. If I ever see you again, I will destroy you so thoroughly that you'll wish the one syndicate had just killed you instead. Keisha stood on shaking legs, clutching her purse to her chest like a shield. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. But Melanie had already turned away, staring out the window at the people passing by on the sidewalk. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that their world existed right alongside another one. A darker world where friends betrayed friends, and 3-second kisses carried death sentences. She heard Keisha leave, heard the bell over the door chime, heard her own heartbeat pounding in her ears like a war drum. Her phone rang. Taehyun Won's name appeared on the screen, and Melanie almost laughed at the timing. Almost. "Did you know I'd figure it out?" she asked instead of hello. "I was counting on it." His voice was maddeningly calm. "You're parked on the street outside. Blue Mercedes. You have 60 seconds to get in before I come in and get you. And Miss Joshua, I promise you don't want me making a scene in public." Melanie looked out the window. The black SUV was parked directly in front of her car, engine running. She could see Taehyun in the driver's seat, phone pressed to his ear, watching the coffee shop entrance. "Why?" she asked. "Why did you need me specifically?" "Come find out." The line went dead. Melanie left 2 20s on the table, more than enough to cover the food that would never be eaten, and walked out into the bright Los Angeles sunshine. The day was beautiful, temperature perfect, sky impossibly blue, the kind of day that belonged in a postcard, not in the middle of a nightmare. She got into the SUV. Taehyun didn't look at her, just pulled smoothly into traffic, navigating the Saturday crowds with the ease of someone who owned these streets. "You manage accounts for the Sinaloa cartel," he said after several blocks of silence. "Not directly. You're too smart for that. But through shell companies and legitimate fronts. 3 years ago, you set up their entire offshore banking structure. Beautiful work, actually. It took my financial analysts 2 months to trace the connections." Melanie's hands clenched in her lap. "That was a legitimate client. A restaurant chain. That exclusively serves as a money laundering operation. Don't insult both our intelligence by playing naive." He turned down a side street, heading away from the main roads into a neighborhood that got progressively emptier. "The Sinaloa operation runs drugs through my territory. We've had an understanding for years. They don't touch my businesses. I don't touch theirs. But recently, they've gotten ambitious. They want K-Town. They want the port access. They want me gone. And I'm what, leverage? You're a key. You have access to their financial infrastructure, their legitimate fronts, their money flow. With you, I can bleed them dry without firing a single shot." He pulled up to a stoplight, finally turning to look at her. "Your friend's debt was never about money. It was about positioning you. The debt was real, but the timing was mine. I've been waiting for an opening to bring you in without alerting the Sinaloa cartel. When your friend got desperate, my people suggested a solution that would bring you directly to me. I just didn't expect you to be quite so bold." "Then why the charade?" Melanie demanded. "Why buy my company? Why the blackmail? Why not just take me the night of the kiss?" Taehyun's smile was slow, predatory. "Because I needed to know if you'd break or bend. Soldiers I can buy. Partners are much more valuable. I'm not your partner." "Not yet." He reached across the center console, and she froze. But he only opened the glove compartment. Inside was a gun, matte black, compact, lethal. He pulled it out and offered it to her, handle first. "But you will be..." "Take it." Melanie stared at the weapon. "I don't." "Yes, you do. I had your background checked very thoroughly, Miss Joshua. Your father was a Marine. He taught you to shoot when you were 12. You qualified expert marksman at 16. You haven't touched a gun since he died. But the training doesn't fade." He pressed the weapon into her hand, his fingers lingering against hers for just a moment. "The safety is off. If you want to kill me, do it now. Shoot me. Drive this car to the nearest police station. Tell them everything. Or put the gun in your purse and accept that we're in this together." The metal was warm from being in the glove box, heavier than she remembered. Melanie wrapped her hand around the grip, muscle memory taking over. Finger resting alongside the trigger guard exactly the way her father had taught her. It would be so easy. One pull, one bullet, end this nightmare before it truly began. She looked at Taehyun Won, at the man who'd blackmailed her, who'd bought her company, who'd orchestrated a friendship betrayal just to trap her. He watched her with complete calm, not a hint of fear in those dark eyes, as if he genuinely didn't care which choice she made. Or maybe he already knew. Melanie put the gun in her purse. "Now you know the cost of loyalty," Taehyun said quietly, putting the SUV back in gear. "Welcome to the war, Miss Joshua. Try not to die before you become useful." They drove into the descending darkness of an underground parking garage, and Melanie understood with crystalline clarity that she'd just crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The dress had been delivered to her apartment with a note in sharp, masculine handwriting. "Wear this. I'll collect you at 7. Melanie held it up to the light, watching the fabric shimmer like oil on water. Midnight blue silk that would cling to every curve, with a slit up the thigh that bordered on obscene. The label was Italian, the stitching immaculate. Custom made. Which meant Taehyun knew her exact measurements. Which meant he'd been watching her far longer than she'd realized. She should have burned it. Should have called the police. Consequences be damned. Should have run. Instead, she put it on. The dress fit like it had been painted on her body, emphasizing the dip of her waist, the curve of her hips, the length of her legs. She'd let her natural curls free, dark spirals framing her face and spilling over bare shoulders. Makeup was minimal. A swipe of burgundy lipstick, a touch of gold shimmer at the inner corners of her eyes to make them look wider, more innocent. War paint again, but a different kind. The kind designed to distract and disarm. Taehyun arrived at 7 exactly. She watched through the peephole as he stood in the hallway, dressed in a tuxedo that transformed him from criminal into something that could pass for legitimate. Almost, the danger still radiated from him like heat. Impossible to disguise no matter how expensive the suit. She opened the door before he could knock. His eyes tracked down her body slowly, deliberately, and Melanie felt that gaze like a physical touch. When he finally met her eyes again, his expression was unreadable. "You wore the dress. You didn't give me much choice." She grabbed her clutch, stepping into the hallway and locking the door behind her. "Where are we going?" "The Artemis Foundation Gala. Charity event. Very high profile." He offered his arm, and she took it because refusing would have been childish. His bicep was solid as stone beneath the fabric. "We need to be seen together, publicly. It establishes you as part of my organization. Makes me a target, you mean? You've been a target since the moment you kissed me." They rode the elevator down in silence, emerged into the parking garage where a limousine waited. The driver opened the door without a word, and Taehyun helped her inside with the practiced ease of someone who'd been doing this his whole life. The interior was soft leather, chilled champagne, and privacy glass. The gala was being held at the Biltmore. Old money, old power. The kind of event where politicians rubbed shoulders with CEOs and everyone pretended their money wasn't soaked in blood. Melanie had attended dozens of these as a consultant, always in the background, always invisible. But tonight, walking in on Taehyun-won's arm, she felt every eye in the ballroom turn to watch. The whispers started immediately. She caught fragments. "New girlfriend. Thought he didn't date. She's gorgeous, but..." Taehyun's hand settled at the small of her back, possessive and warm through the thin silk. "Smile," he murmured against her ear. "You're supposed to be enjoying yourself. I'm supposed to be covering your crimes, not playing dress-up. You're doing both." The warehouse story held beautifully, by the way. The city bought it completely. "You're very good at your job, I'm aware." Melanie accepted champagne from a passing waiter, more for something to do with her hands than any desire to drink. The ballroom was excessive even by LA standards. Crystal chandeliers the size of cars, marble floors so polished they reflected the lights like water, floor-to-ceiling towers of white roses. "How long do we have to stay?" "Until I've made my rounds. There are people here I need to see, conversations I need to have." "You're my insurance. Your human shield, you mean?" He smiled, sharp and predatory. "That too." They circulated through the crowd, Taehyun navigating the social hierarchy with practiced ease. He introduced her as his public relations consultant. Technically true, technically legal. The men shook her hand with lingering touches and calculating eyes. The women assessed her with the cold precision of people evaluating competition. Melanie played her part perfectly, smiling and charming and lying with every breath. She was good at this, had always been good at it. The performance of normalcy, of belonging in spaces that wanted to keep her out. But tonight felt different. Tonight, she wasn't performing for clients or employers. She was performing for a man who could kill her with his bare hands and sleep soundly afterward. "Dance with me," Taehyun said suddenly. And before she could refuse, his hand was at her waist, pulling her onto the dance floor where a live orchestra played something classical and complicated. Melanie fit against him instinctively. Years of cotillion classes and corporate events making her body remember the steps. His hand splayed across her lower back, fingers brushing the exposed skin above the silk. Her hand rested on his shoulder, feeling the coiled muscle beneath. They moved together like they'd done this 1,000 times, and she hated how natural it felt. "You're a good dancer," she said, because the silence was worse than talking. "My mother insisted," said a man who couldn't dance, couldn't lead. His thumb traced small circles against her spine, sending involuntary shivers up her back. "She died when I was 16. Car accident, except it wasn't an accident." Melanie looked up at him, surprised by the confession. "What happened? Rival gang." "They wanted to send a message to my father. So they cut her brake lines and watched her drive off a cliff." His eyes were distant, focused on something she couldn't see. "My father found out who gave the order. Took me with him when he went to collect. Made me watch while he took the man apart piece by piece. Then he handed me the gun and told me to finish it." "How old were you?" 16. "Same age she was when she died. Did you do it?" Taehyun's eyes refocused on her face, and the emptiness in them made her breath catch. "What do you think?" A red laser dot appeared on the silk of her dress, right over her heart, bright as blood against the midnight blue fabric. Melanie saw it for exactly half a second before Taehyun yanked her sideways, spinning them with brutal efficiency. The gunshot came immediately, a sound like the world cracking open, and Taehyun's body went rigid against hers. Warm liquid splashed across her collarbone, and she realized with detached horror that it was his blood. Chaos erupted, screaming, bodies stampeding toward the exits. The orchestra cut off mid-note, replaced by alarms and shouting, and the horrible wet sound of Taehyun's breathing. He was pulling her toward a service door, his left arm hanging useless at his side, blood soaking through his white shirt in an expanding crimson stain. Another shot ricocheted off the marble inches from her head, and then they were through the door into a concrete service corridor that smelled like cleaning supplies and decay. Taehyun's legs buckled. He caught himself against the wall, leaving a bloody handprint on the white paint. "Run," he rasped. "Out the back. My driver will—" "Shut up." Melanie grabbed his good arm, trying to support his weight. He was massive, easily 100 pounds heavier than her, and the floor was slick with blood. His blood, so much blood. Footsteps echoed from somewhere behind them, getting closer. Taehyun's eyes were losing focus, his skin going gray. "Melanie, run." I said, "Shut up." She dragged him around a corner into an alcove that held industrial laundry machines. There was a door marked electrical, no entry, and she kicked it open with her heel, maneuvering his dead weight inside. The room was cramped, filled with circuit breakers and humming machinery and decades of dust. She lowered him to the floor as gently as she could. His head lolled back against the concrete, eyes fluttering. "Stubborn woman," he murmured, says the man who got shot. Her hands were shaking as she pressed them against the wound in his shoulder, trying to slow the bleeding. The bullet had gone clean through. She could see the exit wound when she leaned him forward. "Stay with me. Stay awake." "Not how this works," he said, but his hand came up to cover hers, his fingers cold and sticky with blood. "The gun. In my ankle holster. Take it. Taehyun, take the gun." The footsteps were right outside now. Slow, methodical. The assassin knew they were trapped, knew there was nowhere left to run. Melanie reached down, found the small pistol strapped to Taehyun's ankle, and pulled it free. The weight was familiar, comforting in a way that should have terrified her. She'd shot her father's guns at ranges, had punched holes in paper targets shaped like men. But paper didn't bleed, paper didn't scream. The door opened. The man was unremarkable. Medium height, medium build, the kind of face you'd forget 5 minutes after meeting. He held a pistol with a silencer attached, professional and efficient. When he saw Melanie standing there with Taehyun's gun in her hand, he smiled. "You should have run, sweetheart." Melanie didn't think, didn't hesitate, didn't give herself time to remember that she was a PR consultant, not a killer. Her body remembered the training. Feet shoulder-width apart, arms extended, front sight focus, and her finger squeezed the trigger. The gun bucked in her hand, once, twice. Both shots hit center mass, exactly where her father had taught her to aim. The assassin's eyes widened in surprise, Then nothing. He dropped like someone had cut his strings, the gun clattering from his hand to spin across the floor. Silence rushed back in. Melanie stood frozen, the gun still raised, watching the man's chest for movement. Behind her, she heard Taehyun's breathing, ragged, but steady, alive. "Good shot," he said, and there was something in his voice that hadn't been there before. Respect, maybe, or recognition. Melanie lowered the gun slowly. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. She felt calm, clear, like she'd just solved a particularly complex crisis for a client instead of ending a human life. That should have horrified her. Instead, it felt inevitable. She turned back to Taehyun, who was watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Can you walk?" "Not sure yet." He tried to stand, made it halfway before his legs gave out again. Melanie caught him, taking most of his weight, and together they stumbled toward the door. Behind them, the assassin's body cooled on the concrete floor, and Melanie didn't look back. They made it to the service exit, made it to the limousine, where the driver took one look at them and floored it without asking questions. Made it to somewhere dark and quiet where Taehyun slumped against her, his blood soaking into the midnight silk of her dress, his breath warm against her neck. "You didn't run," he said. "No. Why?" Melanie looked down at the gun still clutched in her hand, at the man bleeding out against her shoulder, at the reflection in the window showing a woman she barely recognized. "I don't know," she whispered, but that was a lie. She knew exactly why. The safe house was unremarkable from the outside, a small craftsman bungalow in Silver Lake that could have belonged to any young professional trying to survive LA's housing market. Inside, however, the illusion shattered immediately. Steel-reinforced door, security cameras hidden in smoke detectors, windows with bulletproof glass, and a medical kit in the bathroom that would have been at home in a field hospital. Melanie had stripped Taehyun's shirt off with clinical efficiency, her hands steady despite the adrenaline crash she could feel hovering at the edges of her consciousness. The shoulder wound was bad, but survivable. The bullet had missed the major arteries, passed clean through muscle and tissue without fragmenting. Lucky. Or maybe Taehyun was just too stubborn to die. He sat on the edge of the bathtub while she worked, his torso a map of violence. Old scars crisscrossed his chest and back. Knife wounds, bullet wounds, burns that looked deliberately inflicted. The tattoos she'd glimpsed at the club covered more of him than she'd realized. Intricate patterns flowing from his neck down both arms and across his ribs. Dragons and demons and Korean script she couldn't read, all rendered in black and gray with the kind of precision that came from master artists. "You're staring," he said, his voice rough with pain. "You're interesting to look at." She threaded the needle she'd sterilized, not bothering with anesthetic. He hadn't asked for any, and she suspected offering would have insulted him. "This is going to hurt." "Good. I like knowing I'm still alive." The first stitch went through cleanly. Taehyun didn't flinch, didn't make a sound, just watched her work with those dark, unreadable eyes. Melanie focused on the task, letting the familiar rhythm of crisis management take over. Assess, strategize, execute. She'd sutured wounds before. Her father had insisted she learn basic field medicine, said you never knew when the skill might save your life. She wondered if he'd known how right he'd be. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Taehyun asked after she'd finished the first few stitches. "My father. He taught me everything. Shooting, field medicine, hand-to-hand combat. Said the world was too dangerous for his daughter to be helpless. Smart man, dead man. Killed in action overseas when I was 22. The words came out flat, practiced. She'd told this story so many times it had lost all meaning. I scattered his ashes in the Pacific like he wanted. Joined the business world instead of following him into the military. Thought I could make a difference without getting my hands dirty. How's that working out for you?" Melanie tied off another stitch with more force than necessary. "I killed a man tonight." "Yes, you did." "I killed him, and I don't feel bad about it." She finally looked up from the wound, meeting his eyes. "What does that make me?" "Alive, which is more than he is." Taehyun reached up with his good hand, his fingers grazing her cheek so gently it sent shivers down her spine. "You're not going to break, are you?" "I don't know what I'm going to do." But she didn't pull away from his touch, didn't stop her own hand from trembling slightly as she placed another stitch. The bathroom was too small, too warm. She could smell his blood, his sweat, the cedar smoke scent of him beneath it all. "I should turn you in. I should take that recording you have of me and go to the police anyway. Take my chances with the legal system, but you won't." "No," she admitted quietly. "I won't. Why? Because I'm already complicit. Because I've spent 10 years cleaning up crimes for people who could afford my services. Because maybe you're right. Maybe the only difference between them and you is that you're honest about what you are." She finished the last stitch, cut the thread, and sat back on her heels. "Or maybe I'm just a coward who doesn't want to go to prison. You saved my life tonight. That's not cowardice. I also took one. That's not heroism." Taehyun was quiet for a long moment, his hand still resting against her face. His thumb traced the line of her jaw, and she felt her pulse kick up in response, her body betraying her even as her mind screamed that this was wrong, dangerous, insane. "Come here," he said softly. "I'm right here. Closer." Melanie stood, and he pulled her between his legs, his good arm wrapping around her waist. She should have resisted, should have maintained the professional distance she'd been so carefully cultivating. But his blood was on her hands and her dress. His life was still warm under her fingertips, and when he looked up at her with those dark eyes full of something she couldn't name, she found herself moving without deciding to. She touched his face, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw, the sharp cheekbones, the small scar above his left eyebrow. His skin was warm despite the blood loss, his heartbeat steady beneath her palm when she pressed her hand against his chest. "You're not going to break," he said again. But this time it wasn't a question. It was a recognition, an acknowledgement of something he'd seen in her the moment she licked his blood from her lip at the club. "No," Melanie agreed. "I'm going to bend. And that's so much worse." She kissed him before she could change her mind. It wasn't like the dare, wasn't brief or innocent or playful. This was something else entirely, something hungry and desperate and laced with the bitter taste of inevitability. His good arm tightened around her waist, pulling her fully against him, and she could feel the heat of his body through the ruined silk dress. His mouth moved against hers with a hunger that matched her own, and when his tongue swept across her lower lip, she opened for him without hesitation. His hand slid up her spine, tangling in her curls, tilting her head back so he could deepen the kiss. She felt the sharp edge of his teeth, tasted copper and whiskey and something uniquely him. Her own hands were everywhere, his neck, his shoulders, careful of the wound, mapping the landscape of muscle and scar tissue in ink. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Melanie's lipstick was smeared across his mouth like evidence of a crime. "This is a terrible idea," she whispered against his lips. "The worst," he agreed, and pulled her back in. They moved to the bed, the only furniture in the safe house beyond the bathroom fixtures and a table in the kitchen. Taehyun was weakened by blood loss, his movements slower than they should have been, but his hands were steady as they found the zipper of her dress. The silk pooled at her feet, and she stood before him in nothing but black lace that left very little to imagination. His eyes tracked over her body with the same intensity he'd used at the gala, but this time there was no pretense of propriety. This was pure want, raw and honest, and terrifying in its implications. "We shouldn't," Melanie said, even as she reached for his belt. "No," Taehyun agreed, helping her with the buckle. "We absolutely shouldn't, but they did anyway." She was careful of his shoulder, conscious of the fresh stitches that could tear open. He was careful of her in different ways, reverent almost, his hands and mouth exploring her body like he was memorizing something precious. They came together with the desperation of people who'd stared down death and survived, who'd crossed lines they couldn't uncross and decided to keep walking anyway. Afterward, they lay tangled in sheets that smelled like blood and sex and the end of the world as Melanie had known it. Taehyun's good arm was wrapped around her waist, holding her against his chest, and she could feel his heartbeat steady and strong beneath her ear. "This doesn't change anything," she said into the darkness. "No," he agreed. "It changes everything. I still hate you." "Good. That makes this honest." Melanie's phone buzzed on the nightstand. She'd forgotten she even had it. She reached for it with heavy limbs, expecting Keisha or Val or someone from the office. Instead, it was an unknown number, a video file. She almost didn't open it, almost deleted it without watching. But something made her thumb press play, and then she was watching grainy security footage from the gala. The angle was from above, showing the dance floor in black and white, showing the red laser dot that had hovered center mass on her chest, showing the split second before he'd moved, showing him spin them so his body took the bullet instead of hers. Melanie's breath caught. She watched it 3 more times, each viewing making it clearer. The bullet had been aimed at her. Not Taehyun. Her, he'd saved her life. You knew, she whispered, turning to look at him. You saw the laser sight, and you knew the bullet was meant for me, and you took it anyway. Taehyun's expression didn't change. Yes. Why? Because you're mine now. And I protect what's mine. I'm not yours. Lie to yourself if it helps you sleep. But don't lie to me. He pulled her closer, despite the pain it must have caused his shoulder. Someone wanted you dead tonight, Melanie. Someone who knew you'd be there with me, who had access to the guest list and the security schedule, which means someone in my organization is leaking information. The warmth she'd felt from their intimacy evaporated instantly, replaced by ice-cold clarity. A mole. A mole who wants both of us dead. He grabbed his phone from the nightstand, pulled up a document, and handed it to her. 3 people had access to my schedule for tonight. 3 people who knew exactly where I'd be standing at what time. Melanie grabbed her tablet, running the security logs herself. 3 people had access to your schedule tonight, Taehyun. 2 guards and 1 lieutenant. She turned the screen to him. 1 Ji-hoon. Taehyun shoved the tablet away, his eyes cold. Run it again. It's not him. It's impossible. Check everyone else first. Look at the data. Taehyun pulled up financial records, encrypted communications, security footage from the past 3 months. The pattern is there. Every time we've been hit, every time shipments have been intercepted, every time information has leaked, Ji-hoon was one of the people with access. Melanie scrolled through the evidence, her analytical mind cataloging the connections, despite her instinctive rejection. The transfers to offshore accounts, the deleted communications, the subtle inconsistencies in his alibis. It was circumstantial, but damning. He's your brother, she said. Your only family, which is why I've been blind to it. Taehyun's voice was completely flat, emotionless in the way that suggested he was feeling too much to express. He's the only person I trusted absolutely. The only person I thought was beyond corruption. You could be wrong. This could be... I'm not wrong. And you know it. He took the phone back, his jaw tight. Find me proof. Absolute, incontrovertible proof that I can't deny or rationalize away. You're a fixer. You know how to dig through digital footprints. Prove it's him. And if I do? Taehyun didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet she almost didn't hear him. Then I'll do what needs to be done. Because that's what kings do. Melanie lay back down beside him, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of what he'd just asked her to do settle on her chest like a stone. He wanted her to find proof that his brother had betrayed him. Wanted her to hand him evidence that would end in Ji-hoon's death. Wanted her to be the one to pull the trigger, metaphorically, if not literally. I saved your life tonight, she said. Yes, you saved mine. Yes. So we're even. No, Taehyun said, his arm tightening around her waist. We're just getting started. Melanie had always been good with computers. A skill learned out of necessity in an industry that ran on digital trails and buried evidence. But Ji-hoon One's security protocols were impressive. Military-grade encryption, rotating passwords, biometric locks on his devices. He was either incredibly paranoid or incredibly guilty, probably both. She'd commandeered a corner of Taehyun's main office, a building in K-Town that officially housed an import-export company and unofficially served as the nerve center of the One Syndicate. 3 monitors surrounded her, each displaying different data streams: financial transactions, communications, logs, surveillance footage. Taehyun's tech specialist, a nervous kid named Jin, did the heavy lifting on the encryption, but Melanie was the one connecting the dots. She directed him where to look, translating the raw data he mined into a narrative of betrayal. She'd been at it for 18 hours straight, fueled by coffee and the sick feeling in her stomach that came from hunting evidence against a man whose only crime might be sharing DNA with a monster. Taehyun hadn't left the building either, though he'd stayed out of her workspace, giving her room to work, or maybe giving himself distance from what she might find. His shoulder was healing. The stitches were holding, the bleeding had stopped, and he'd regained most of his mobility. But she could see the strain in the way he moved, the careful precision that suggested pain just beneath the surface. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number, but the area code was familiar. DC, Federal. She almost didn't answer, almost let it go to voicemail. But 18 hours of staring at financial records had fried her decision-making capabilities, so she picked up. Hello? Melanie. The voice was familiar in a way that made her stomach turn. It's been a while. Fred. Her ex-husband, FBI Special Agent Fred Wright, who'd served her divorce papers 2 years ago with a smile and a promise that he'd never speak to her again. How did you get this number? She asked, her voice flat. I'm FBI, Mel. I can get any number I want. He sounded exactly the same. Smooth, confident, the kind of voice that had convinced her to marry him 8 years ago. I heard you've been keeping interesting company lately. Taehyun-won. That's a dangerous man to be associated with. I'm his PR consultant. It's a professional relationship. Is that what you call sleeping with him? Fred let that hang in the air for a moment. We have surveillance footage from the safe house in Silver Lake. Want me to describe what I saw? Melanie's blood went cold. That's illegal surveillance. Necessary surveillance. One is the target of a major federal investigation. Anyone in his orbit is fair game. A pause. I'm worried about you, Mel. This man is a killer. He's dangerous. Let me help you. I don't need your help. Yes, you do. Meet me tomorrow. Silver Lake Reservoir, the south entrance. 2 p.m. Come alone. His voice softened, taking on the intimate tone he'd used when they were married. I still care about you. I don't want to see you go down with him. The line went dead before she could respond. Melanie sat staring at her phone, her mind racing. Fred wanted to meet. Fred, who'd walked away from their marriage claiming he couldn't be with someone who compromised their ethics for money. Fred, who'd made her feel small and dirty for the work she did. Fred, who was suddenly very interested in her relationship with Taehyun-won. Something was wrong. Federal agents didn't reach out to potential witnesses like this. They subpoenaed them, brought them in for formal questioning. They didn't make clandestine phone calls with promises of help. She looked back at her monitors, at the evidence she'd been compiling on Ji-hoon. Then she opened a new search window and typed in a name. Fred Wright. 30 minutes later, she walked into Taehyun's private office without knocking. He was standing at the window overlooking K-Town, a glass of whiskey in his hand, watching the city lights like they held answers to questions he didn't want to ask. I need to tell you something, she said. He turned, and his eyes tracked over her face with that unsettling intensity. You found something. Yes, but not what you expected. She pulled up her phone, showing him the financial records she'd uncovered. Fred Wright, my ex-husband, FBI Special Agent, also, apparently, on the Sinaloa cartel's payroll. Taehyun took the phone, scrolling through the evidence. Explain. He's been moving money for them for 3 years, using his position to provide cover, to run interference with federal investigations. He's not trying to take you down because you're a criminal. He's trying to take you down because you're competition. She pulled up more files. The Sinaloa operation wants K-Town. Fred is the one helping them get it, and he just called me, asking to meet tomorrow. Alone? Alone. Taehyun's expression didn't change, but she saw his hand tighten around the whiskey glass. He wants the encryption keys, the ones you created for the Sinaloa offshore accounts. How did you? Because it's what I would do. You have access to their entire financial infrastructure. With those keys, he could drain their accounts, make it look like you did it, and eliminate both his bosses and his competition in one move. He drained the whiskey, set the glass down with careful control. You're not going to that meeting. Yes, I am. Melanie. He's dirty. You know it, I know it. But I need proof I can use. The kind that holds up in court, not just in the criminal underworld. She crossed her arms, meeting his gaze. I go to the meeting. I get him talking. Your people record everything. Then we have evidence that a federal agent is working with the cartel, and we can use that to what? Turn him into his fellow agents? Half of them are probably on the take too. Taehyun moved closer, his presence filling the space between them. You walk into that meeting, you might not walk out. Then make sure your surveillance team is good. This isn't your fight. Yes, it is. He used me, used our marriage. He knew what I did for work, knew the clients I managed. and he married me to get access. The realization settled over her like a heavy coat, suffocating and inescapable. I was never his wife. I was always his mark. Taehyun studied her for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone, made a call in rapid Korean, and hung up. Fine. But you wear a wire. You carry a weapon. And the second things go wrong, my people extract you by any means necessary. Agreed. And Melanie? He cupped her face in his hand, his thumb tracing her lower lip. If he touches you, I will burn down everything he's ever loved and make him watch before I kill him. Are we clear? She should have been terrified of the cold promise in his voice. Instead, she felt something warm unfurl in her chest, dangerous and addictive. Crystal, good. He kissed her, hard and possessive, before stepping back. Now show me what you found on my brother. Melanie returned to her monitors, pulling up the evidence she'd compiled over 18 hours. The leak started 6 months ago. Small things at first, intercepted shipments, compromised safe houses. Then it escalated. The pattern matches Ji-hoon's access to secure information. That's not proof. That's correlation. I know. So I went deeper. She pulled up a series of encrypted messages recovered from a deleted email account. These are communications between someone using the alias Crown Prince and a Sinaloa lieutenant. They're discussing your operations in detail. Security protocols, shipment schedules, personnel files. Taehyun leaned over her shoulder, reading the messages. His jaw was tight, his shoulders rigid. Anyone could have created that alias. Agreed, except for this. She pulled up metadata from one of the messages. The email was sent from a device that pinged off a cell tower near Ji-hoon's apartment at 2:30 in the morning. On a night when he told you he was out of town. Silence. Heavy and terrible. It's circumstantial, Taehyun said finally. It's a pattern, and there's more. Melanie pulled up bank records. Ji-hoon has been making deposits to an offshore account. Small amounts, easy to miss, but they add up to just over $2 million in the past 6 months. Where is the money coming from? I don't know yet. The trail goes cold at a shell company in the Caymans. But I'll find it. She turned in her chair, looking up at him. You asked for proof. I'm getting you proof. But Taehyun, you need to prepare yourself for what I'm going to find. He didn't respond, just stared at the monitors like they were showing him footage of his own execution. He's your brother, Melanie said softly. If you want me to stop. No, keep digging. His voice was completely flat. I need to know. Whatever the cost. She worked through the night, tracing the money, following the digital breadcrumbs Ji-hoon had tried to erase. Taehyun stayed with her, pacing the office, drinking whiskey with mechanical precision, his face a mask that revealed nothing. By dawn, she had it. The smoking gun. The absolute proof. The money is coming from the Sinaloa cartel, she said, her voice hoarse from hours of not speaking. They've been paying Ji-hoon $200,000 a month to feed them information. They want to take over your territory, and he's helping them do it. Taehyun stood at the window, backlit by the rising sun, his silhouette perfectly still. Why? I don't know. Find out. So she kept digging, pushing past exhaustion, past the ethics that should have made her stop. And finally, buried in encrypted communications, she found it. A message from Ji-hoon to the Sinaloa lieutenant. He's my brother, but he's also the man who killed our father. I don't care about the money. I want to watch him bleed. Melanie's hands shook as she pulled up the message for Taehyun. He blames you for your father's death. My father died 5 years ago. Heart attack. That's what the death certificate says. But Ji-hoon believes differently. She found the attachment, a coroner's report that had been sealed, marked confidential. He thinks you poisoned him, that you wanted control of the organization and killed your father to get it. Taehyun read the report in silence. When he finished, he carefully set the phone down on the desk. I didn't kill my father. I know. How do you know? Because, if you had, you wouldn't need me to prove your brother's guilt. You'd just kill him and move on. She stood, crossing to where he stood at the window. But you don't want to believe he betrayed you. You want me to be wrong. Yes, he admitted quietly. I do. I'm not wrong. No, you're not. They stood together, watching the sun climb higher over Los Angeles. And Melanie wondered if this was what damnation felt like. Not fire and brimstone, but the slow realization that everyone you trusted was a liar, and the only honest thing in your life was the monster who'd bought your company and blackmailed you into compliance. "I'm meeting Fred tomorrow," she said. "After that, we deal with Jihoon." "After that," Taehyun agreed, "we go to war." The press conference was Melanie's idea. After the gala shooting, Taehyun's reputation had taken a hit. The media was circling, asking questions about security failures and rumors of gang violence. They needed a show of strength, a demonstration that the one organization was legitimate, professional, untouchable. So Melanie had arranged everything. The venue at the Four Seasons, the media list carefully curated to include sympathetic outlets, the talking points designed to project confidence without admitting guilt. Taehyun would announce a major charitable initiative, a community center in K-Town, $50 million invested in youth programs and small business development. He would look like a pillar of the community, not a crime lord. And Melanie would stand beside him, the polished professional who'd transformed his image from dangerous to respectable. She'd spent the morning in preparation, choosing her outfit with calculated precision, a cream suit that photographed well under camera lights. Minimal jewelry, hair pulled back in a professional bun. She looked competent, trustworthy, like someone who'd never killed a man in a service corridor or slept with her criminal employer. The press room was packed. Journalists crowded the space, cameras set up in rows, the energy electric with anticipation. Melanie stood backstage with Taehyun, doing final run-throughs of his talking points, making sure he knew which questions to deflect and which to answer. "You're good at this," he said, adjusting his tie in the mirror. "It's what you pay me for." "Is it?" He turned to face her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "What we are, Melanie. It's not just business anymore. Yes, it is. That's all it can be. Lie to yourself if it helps. But don't lie to you. I know." She straightened his collar, her fingers lingering against the fabric. "After this, we deal with Jihoon, and then we figure out what comes next." The stage manager gave them a 5-minute warning. Melanie took one last look at Taehyun, powerful, composed, every inch the legitimate businessman, and felt something twist in her chest that might have been pride or might have been grief for the person she used to be. They walked on stage together. The camera flashes were blinding, the noise deafening. Melanie took her place slightly behind and to the left of the podium, the position that said advisor without demanding attention. Taehyun approached the microphone, and the room quieted. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice steady and authoritative. "Thank you all for coming. I know there have been questions following the incident at the Artemis Foundation Gala, and I want to address those concerns directly." Melanie watched the journalists, reading their body language, identifying the friendly faces and the hostile ones. Everything was going according to plan. Taehyun was hitting his marks, staying on message, projecting exactly the image they'd crafted, and then he went off script. "But before I discuss the charitable initiative, I need to address a personnel matter." He turned, looking directly at Melanie. "Miss Joshua, would you please step forward?" Confusion flickered across her face, but she moved to the podium anyway, maintaining her professional mask. "Yes? I'm terminating your employment with the one organization, effective immediately." The room erupted. Journalists shouted questions. Camera flashes intensified. Melanie stood frozen, not understanding, waiting for the punchline that didn't come. "Miss Joshua has been under investigation for embezzlement," Taehyun continued, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We discovered that she has been systematically stealing from our organization for the past 3 months. The total amount exceeds $2 million. "That's not true," Melanie said, her voice barely audible over the noise. "Security has already seized your accounts and your passport. The evidence has been turned over to the police." His eyes were flat, emotionless. "You used your position of trust to betray this organization. You're nothing but a whore with a degree who thought she could sleep her way to the top and steal from us in the process." The words hit like physical blows. Melanie felt her face go hot, felt tears prick at her eyes even as her brain screamed that this couldn't be real, couldn't be happening. She looked at Taehyun, at the man she'd saved, who'd saved her, who'd held her while she slept, and saw nothing but cold calculation. "Security," he said, and two large men appeared from backstage. "Please escort Miss Joshua from the building." They grabbed her arms, and she didn't resist. Couldn't resist. The room was spinning, voices blurring together, camera flashes making everything surreal and nightmarish. They dragged her through the side exit, past the loading dock, and dumped her on the sidewalk like trash. The door slammed shut, the lock engaged. Melanie stood alone on the street in her cream suit, and the sky decided that was the perfect moment to open up. Rain came down in sheets, soaking through her clothes in seconds, washing away the careful makeup she'd applied. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Get somewhere safe. Now." No apology. No explanation. Just a geolocation tag and a command. Melanie stared at the screen, rain dripping from her nose. The humiliation was real, but the discard? That was strategy. And finally, "I'm sorry, but this was the only way." Melanie's hands shook as she read the messages. Understanding came slowly, like a key turning in a lock that had rusted shut. This was a performance. A play to make Fred think she was worthless, that the encryption keys were worthless, that there was no reason to target her anymore. But the knowledge didn't stop the humiliation from burning through her veins, didn't stop the image of Taehyun calling her a whore from repeating in her mind on an endless loop, didn't stop the tears that mixed with the rain and tasted like salt and betrayal. She walked to the coffee shop, sat in the back corner, ordered nothing. Her phone buzzed continuously. Journalists calling for comment, former clients rescinding contracts, the professional life she'd built crumbling in real time. She watched it happen with numb detachment, like observing a car crash in slow motion. An hour passed, then another. The rain stopped, but she stayed soaked, shivering in the air conditioning. Her phone rang. "Fred, I saw the press conference," he said without preamble. "Jesus, Mel. Are you okay?" "No." Her voice sounded foreign to her own ears, small and broken. "Meet me, right now. I have contacts who can help. We can fix this." "Where?" "The Warehouse District. Port of Los Angeles. I'll text you the address." His voice was warm, concerned. Everything Taehyun's had been cold. "You don't have to go through this alone." The line went dead. A moment later, the address came through. And beneath it, in a different text thread, another message from Taehyun. "He's moving faster than we expected. Surveillance team is in position. You're not alone." Melanie stood on legs that felt like water, left a $50 bill on the table for the coffee she never ordered, and walked out into the overcast afternoon. She was going to confront her ex-husband. She was going to get him talking. She was going to bring down a corrupt federal agent and cripple the Sinaloa cartel's operations. And maybe, just maybe, she was going to prove to herself that what Taehyun had done on that stage was strategy, not truth. That she was more than what he'd called her. That she hadn't fallen in love with a man who saw her as nothing but a useful tool. The Warehouse District loomed ahead, all rusted metal and broken windows. She walked toward it like she was walking toward her own execution. And in a way, maybe she was. The warehouse Fred had chosen was exactly the kind of place people died in crime novels. Isolated, abandoned, with security cameras that had stopped working years ago. Melanie approached it with her chin up and her hands empty, playing the role of broken woman seeking rescue. The wire Taehyun's team had fitted her with was sewn into the lining of her jacket, undetectable unless someone strip-searched her. The panic button was disguised as an earring. The gun was strapped to her inner thigh, small and cold against her skin. She was walking into a trap, but she was also setting one. Fred was waiting inside, leaning against a desk that looked like it had survived the apocalypse. He looked exactly the same as he had 2 years ago when he'd served her divorce papers. Tall, conventionally handsome, with that easy confidence that came from never having to question his place in the world. White, privileged, and utterly convinced of his own righteousness. He'd always seen her as less than. She realized that now. A trophy wife with useful skills. Someone to show off at bureau functions while quietly resenting her success. "Mel," he said, pushing off the desk, and approaching with open arms like they were old friends, instead of exes who'd torn each other apart. "I'm so glad you came. I was worried you'd—" "Cut the bullshit, Fred." She stayed out of reach, her voice sharp enough to draw blood. "I know what you are. I know who you work for. So let's skip the concerned ex-husband routine. and get to the part where you tell me what you want." He stopped, and something shifted in his expression. The warmth bled out, replaced by calculation. "You always were too smart for your own good. The encryption keys. That's what this is about, isn't it? You want access to the Sinaloa cartel's offshore accounts." "I want a lot of things." He circled her slowly, predatory. "But yes, the keys are the priority. You created that system, Mel. You're the only person who can access it without triggering the security protocols. And you think I'll just hand them over? After you ruined my reputation on national television?" Fred smiled. "I think you'll do it to stay alive. And because I'm offering you something Taehyun-won never will." "What's that?" "Freedom." He pulled out his phone, showed her a series of documents. New identity, offshore accounts in her name, a fresh start in a country without extradition treaties. "You give me the keys, you walk away from all of this. Clean break, new life." Melanie looked at the documents, at the promise of escape, and felt nothing but contempt. "You really think I'm that stupid? I think you're that desperate." He pocketed the phone. "The Sinaloa operation wants you dead, Mel. You know too much. You've seen too much. The only reason you're still alive is because they think you might be useful. Prove you're not, and they'll gut you like a fish." "And what about you? You're FBI. Aren't you supposed to protect people, not threaten them?" "I protect people who deserve protection. You've been enabling criminals for a decade. You're as dirty as they are." He moved closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, the same expensive brand he'd worn when they were married. "Give me the keys, and I'll make sure you live through this. Refuse and I'll let nature take its course." Melanie's mind raced, calculating angles. Taehyun's surveillance team was listening to every word. They had Fred on tape now, admitting to extortion, admitting to working with the cartel. But she needed more. Needed him to give up names, locations, the full scope of the FBI corruption. "I don't have the keys," she lied. "They're encrypted separately. I'd need access to the original servers to retrieve them, then get access." "I can't. Taehyun fired me, remember? I don't have security clearance anymore." Fred studied her, and she could see him weighing her words, deciding if she was telling the truth. "Then I guess you're not as useful as I thought." He pulled a gun from his waistband, standard FBI issue, which somehow made it worse, and pressed it against her temple. The metal was cold, impersonal. Melanie's heart kicked into overdrive, but she forced herself to stay calm, to breathe through the terror. "Last chance," Fred said. "The keys. Now. They're in my apartment. A USB drive hidden in the bookshelf. Second shelf, behind the Toni Morrison novels." Another lie, but delivered with enough specificity to sound convincing. Fred's finger relaxed slightly on the trigger. "See? That wasn't so hard." He pulled out his phone, made a call in rapid Spanish. Melanie caught fragments. "Apartment, USB, secure it." While he was distracted, Melanie turned to the guard watching the door. "He's going down," she whispered, nodding at Fred. "I have the codes to the account he's trying to access. Let me at that terminal for 30 seconds, and I'll transfer $5 million to you right now." The guard hesitated, greed warring with loyalty. Greed won. He stepped aside. Melanie didn't transfer the money. She initiated a system-wide financial lockout that alerted Taehyun's team to the IP address immediately. "They're sending someone to retrieve the drive," Fred said, pocketing his phone. "We're going to wait here until they confirm. If you lied to me, I'll know. And if you lied," he pressed the gun harder against her skull, "I'll paint these walls with your brain matter. Romantic as ever." "Shut up." They waited in tense silence. 5 minutes. 10. Melanie counted her breaths, staying centered, staying ready. The gun at her thigh was a comforting weight, but she couldn't reach it while Fred held her at gunpoint. She needed an opening, needed him to make a mistake. His phone rang. He answered in Spanish, listened, and his face went dark. "What do you mean there's nothing there?" Melanie smiled. "I lied. You stupid." She moved before he could finish, dropping her weight and twisting out from under the gun. The shot went wide, punching through the ceiling and sending concrete dust raining down. Melanie's hand was already moving, reaching for the weapon strapped to her thigh, pulling it free with practiced ease. They faced each other across 3 feet of empty warehouse space, both armed, both perfectly still. "You can't shoot a federal agent," Fred said. "That's life in prison. Not if that federal agent is dirty. Not if I have proof of your corruption. Not if you're about to kill me in a closed crime scene." She kept the gun steady, exactly the way her father had taught her. "Drop your weapon, Fred. It's over. The hell it is." The warehouse door crashed open. Men poured in. Not Taehyun's team, but Sinaloa soldiers, armed and efficient. They fanned out, surrounding them both. And Melanie realized with sinking dread that Fred had been stalling, waiting for backup. "Drop your weapon," Fred said again, and this time there was triumph in his voice. "You're outnumbered, outgunned, and out of options." Melanie looked at the 10 men with automatic rifles pointed at her head, at her ex-husband with his smug smile, at the situation that had gone from bad to catastrophic. And she started laughing. "Something funny?" Fred asked. "You still don't get it." She lowered her gun slowly, carefully, and set it on the floor. "I didn't come here to escape. I came here to stall." "Stall for what?" "For this." The lights went out. Emergency generators kicked in after 3 seconds, but those 3 seconds were enough. Melanie dropped, rolled, came up behind a support pillar as gunfire erupted from the warehouse rafters. Taehyun's team, positioned before she'd even arrived, opened fire with surgical precision. The Sinaloa soldiers went down one by one, professional and efficient. Fred ran for the back exit, but stopped dead. Standing in the doorway, gun raised not at Taehyun, but at Melanie, was one Ji-hoon. "You shouldn't have dug so deep, Melanie," Ji-hoon said, his finger tightening on the trigger. Taehyun stepped out of the shadows, his own gun leveled at his brother's head. "Drop it, Ji-hoon, or I drop you." "Hello, Agent Wright," Taehyun said pleasantly. "We need to talk." Melanie stayed behind her pillar, breathing hard, adrenaline singing through her veins. From her position, she could see her ex-husband on his knees, hands zip-tied behind his back, blood running from a cut on his forehead. Taehyun stood over him, and the cold fury in his expression was terrifying to witness. "Where are the others?" Taehyun asked. "The other FBI agents on the cartel payroll. Names." Fred spit blood. "Fuck you." Taehyun nodded to one of his men, who stepped forward and broke Fred's pinky finger with casual efficiency. The scream echoed off the concrete walls. "Names," Taehyun repeated. "I'll kill you," Fred gasped. Another finger broke. Another scream. Melanie watched, and some small part of her, the part that had gone to law school, that had believed in justice and fairness and the rule of law, recoiled in horror. But the larger part, the part that had been forged in the past weeks of violence and betrayal, felt only cold satisfaction. "The files," she called out, emerging from behind the pillar. "Fred keeps backup files, insurance against his superiors. They'll be in a safety deposit box. First National Bank, downtown branch, box number 447. Fred's face went white. "How did you?" "Because I know you. You're paranoid and controlling, and you never trusted anyone." She walked closer, looking down at the man she'd once loved. "The files will have everything. Names, dates, transaction records. Enough to bring down your entire operation." Taehyun's smile was sharp as broken glass. "Thank you, Miss Joshua. That's very helpful." "What are you going to do with him?" she asked. "What do you want me to do with him?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with implications. Taehyun was offering her a choice. Justice, his way, quick and permanent. Or justice, the legal way. Courts and lawyers and the possibility that Fred might walk free on technicalities. Melanie thought about the press conference. About being called a whore on national television. About the humiliation and the betrayal and the systematic destruction of everything she'd built. "Keep him alive," she said finally. "He's worth more to us as a witness than a corpse. Use the files to flip him. Make him testify against his co-conspirators." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." She turned to Fred. "You're going to spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, knowing that Taehyun 1 let you live because I asked him to. You're going to wake up every morning and remember that I could have had you killed, and I chose mercy instead. And that's going to hurt worse than any beating he could give you." Fred stared at her with something that might have been respect or might have been fear. "Take him," Taehyun ordered. His men hauled Fred to his feet, dragging him toward a van waiting outside. When they were gone, Taehyun turned to Melanie. "You're bleeding." She looked down. There was blood on her jacket. Hers, from where she'd scraped her arm during the roll. "It's nothing. Let me see." He crossed the space between them, gentle hands examining the wound. "We need to get you cleaned up. After. First, we need to retrieve those files before someone else does. My people are already on it." He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her with surprising tenderness. "You did well. Better than well. You were magnificent. I was terrified. That's what makes it brave." He tilted her face up, his thumb brushing across her cheek. "I meant what I said at the press conference. About you being brilliant. You also called me a whore. I called you what I needed to call you to keep you alive. I'm sorry. If I could take it back." "Don't." Melanie pressed a finger to his lips. "Don't apologize for doing what had to be done. We're past that now." "Are we?" She kissed him instead of answering, and tasted blood and gunpowder, and the bitter satisfaction of revenge well executed. The port of Los Angeles lit up like a war zone. Automatic gunfire chattered in staccato bursts. Shipping containers exploded, sending metal shrapnel screaming through the air. Men screamed and died while seagulls wheeled overhead, indifferent to the carnage below. Melanie Joshua stood in the control tower overlooking the chaos, 3 monitors glowing in the darkness, her fingers flying across keyboards as she coordinated the defense like a general marshalling troops. She'd come a long way from the woman who'd taken a dare in a nightclub. That woman would have been horrified by what she was doing now. This woman felt only cold calculation. "Team 3, fall back to position Alpha," she said into the headset. "Team 5, advance on the south dock. They're trying to flank you." On the monitors, she could see Taehyun moving through the battlefield like death in a bespoke suit, even wounded, his shoulder still healing from the gala shooting. He was terrifying to watch. He moved with brutal efficiency, though Melanie could see the slight hitch in his swing, the way he favored his left side where the stitches were undoubtedly tearing with every recoil of his weapon, a demon conducting a symphony of violence. The Sinaloa cartel had launched everything they had left at the One Syndicate. 50 men, fully armed, determined to either take K-Town or die trying. They'd chosen poorly, but they weren't the only ones who'd shown up to the party. FBI vans had appeared 20 minutes into the firefight, surrounding the port, blocking all exits. Through the control tower windows, Melanie could see federal agents taking positions, setting up sniper nests, preparing to raid the scene. She pulled up the insurance folder she'd kept encrypted on her private server since her days fixing crises for Washington's elite, files she'd been hoarding for years, waiting for a rainy day, including FBI Director Sarah Cole. Melanie opened a secure connection, routed through 3 proxy servers, and encrypted 6 ways to Sunday. Then she sent a single message to the director's private phone: "Call off the raid, or every journalist in Los Angeles gets these files in 60 seconds. Her phone rang immediately. "This is Director Cole. Who is this?" "Someone who knows you've been taking cartel money for 3 years. Someone who has proof. Someone who's willing to go public unless you stand your people down right now. You're committing extortion against a federal officer. You're committing treason against the United States. I win." Melanie pulled up the files on her second monitor, finger hovering over the send button. "You have 30 seconds to decide. Call off the raid, or explain to Congress why you've been enabling narcotics trafficking." Silence on the line. Heavy. Weighted with the sound of a career ending in real time. "Stand down," Director Cole said finally, and Melanie heard her relay the order through a different radio. "All teams, stand down. Return to base." Through the window, she watched the FBI vans pull out one by one, leaving the port to the violence, leaving the criminals to kill each other without interference. "If these files ever surface," the director began, "they won't. As long as you stay out of K-Town, as long as you forget the one organization exists, these files stay buried." Melanie closed the connection, cutting off whatever threat was about to follow. She'd just blackmailed the FBI, made the federal government back down through sheer force of leverage, and she felt absolutely nothing. "Melanie." Taehyun's voice came through the headset, rough with exhaustion. "We have a problem." She pulled up his body camera feed. The image shook as Taehyun kicked open the door to a shipping container converted into an office. His men dragged Fred in behind him, dumping the battered agent into a chair. But they weren't alone. Standing in the shadows, aiming a handgun directly at the camera lens, at Taehyun's chest, was one Ji-hoon. "Melanie." Taehyun's voice came through the headset, breathless and distorted by static. "Get down here." She didn't ask questions. She ripped off the headset, grabbed the physical drive containing the blackmail files, and ran for the stairs. She wasn't going to watch the end of the war from a screen. She burst out of the tower and sprinted across the tarmac, the smell of smoke and ozone thick in her lungs. She reached the open container just as Ji-hoon stepped out of the shadows to face Taehyun. "Hello, brother," Ji-hoon said. "Surprised to see me?" "Not really." Taehyun kept his aim steady. "Melanie found the evidence. I've known for days. And yet you did nothing. Still hoping I'd prove her wrong?" Ji-hoon's eyes flicked to the doorway, spotting Melanie the second she arrived. He moved faster than thought. He kicked Fred's chair over, sending the agent sprawling to create a distraction. As Taehyun flinched, Ji-hoon lunged, snatching Melanie from the doorway and yanking her back against his chest. He dug the barrel hard into her temple. "No more pawns," Ji-hoon spat, ignoring Fred groaning on the floor. "Just leverage." He tightened his grip on Melanie. Always so sentimental. Father's greatest weakness, passed down to his eldest son. "Ji-hoon, put the gun down," Taehyun said, his voice dropping to a terrifying calm. "We can talk about this." "Talk?" The younger man's face twisted with rage. "The time for talking ended 5 years ago when you murdered our father. I didn't kill him. He had a heart attack, caused by the poison you'd been feeding him for months. I found the medical records, Taehyun. I know what you did." Ji-hoon's hand shook, the gun wavering. "You wanted control of the organization. You couldn't wait for him to die naturally, so you helped things along." Taehyun's expression never changed. "I didn't poison father, but even if I had, which I didn't, he was dying anyway. Cancer. Inoperable. He had 6 months, maybe less. He told me himself, the night before he died. Lies. You're lying to protect yourself. Check the medical records again. Look at the hospital files, not the death certificate. He had stage 4 pancreatic cancer. He kept it secret because he didn't want the organization to see him as weak." Taehyun lowered his gun slightly, his voice softening. "I didn't kill father, Ji-hoon. I mourned him. I still mourn him." Ji-hoon's face crumpled, doubt creeping in. But the poison, pain medication. He was taking massive doses to stay functional in his final months. The medical examiner mistook the levels for poisoning because no one knew he had cancer. Taehyun took a step closer. "You've been manipulated. The Sinaloa operation fed you false information, knowing you'd believe it because you were young when father died. They needed a wedge between us, and you gave them one." Melanie felt the cold steel of the barrel digging into her temple. She held her breath, staring into Taehyun's eyes, willing him to see that she wasn't afraid, that she trusted him to take the shot. "She made you weak," Ji-hoon said, his voice cracking, though he didn't lower the weapon. He tightened his grip on her, using her body as a shield. "That woman. Melanie. She's turned you soft." "No," Taehyun said quietly, his gaze locking onto his brother's one last time. "She made me a king." He pulled the trigger. The shot was surgical, passing inches from Melanie's ear and striking the hand holding the gun. Ji-hoon screamed, releasing Melanie as his weapon clattered to the floor. She scrambled away, hitting the metal floor of the container and rolling to safety behind a crate. Ji-hoon stumbled back, clutching his ruined hand, shock written across his face. "You shot me," he gasped. "You actually shot me. You betrayed me. You sided with our enemies. You tried to destroy everything father built." Taehyun's voice was flat, emotionless. He didn't look at Melanie. His focus was entirely on the threat. "Did you think there wouldn't be consequences? I'm your brother." "Were, past tense." Taehyun stepped forward, aiming the gun at Ji-hoon's head. "I loved you, protected you, gave you everything, and you repaid me with treachery." "Taehyun, wait," Melanie gasped, the ringing in her ears deafening from the gunshot. "Don't," Taehyun said, his voice cold. He didn't look away from his brother. "This is family business." Melanie watched from the floor, heart hammering against her ribs, as Taehyun looked at his younger brother, the last blood relative he had in the world, and made his choice. The gunshot echoed through the port. Seagulls scattered into the night sky, and Won Ji-hoon fell to the floor of the shipping container, a neat hole between his eyes, gone before he hit the ground. Taehyun stood over the body for a long moment. Then he turned to Fred, still zip-tied to the chair, and staring in wide-eyed horror. Taehyun pulled out his phone. "The files on you specifically. They're being transferred to the Department of Justice as we speak. The director has agreed to sacrifice you to save herself. You'll be the lone wolf, the scapegoat. You'll spend the rest of your life in federal prison, if you're lucky." "You son of a bitch," Fred spat. "You can't." "I already did. Consider it a gift from my associate." Taehyun holstered his gun and finally turned to Melanie. He walked to her, offering a hand to help her up. She took it, her fingers trembling slightly, but when he pulled her to her feet, she didn't let go. They walked out of the container together, leaving the bodies and the betrayal behind them. Outside, the first light of dawn was breaking over the port. The battlefield had gone quiet. The surviving cartel soldiers either dead or fled. Taehyun's forces were securing the area, stacking bodies, erasing evidence. By noon, the official story would be a joint FBI private security raid on a domestic terror cell gone wrong. Heroic, tragic, and completely fabricated. No one would ever know the truth. He looked at her, and his eyes were hollow, empty in a way she'd never seen before. "I killed my brother," he said. "I know. Does that change things?" "No." She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. Blood-stained and gunpowder-scented and perfect in its honesty. "We're past the point of redemption. Both of us. Are you saying you're staying?" "I'm saying I don't have anywhere else to go. You destroyed my reputation, remember? Made me unemployable. Froze my assets." She smiled without humor. "You made sure the only place I could survive was by your side. I'm a monster." "So am I." She pulled him closer, her other hand cupping his face. "We can be monsters together."